When you're ready.
Vulnerability is being subject to harm and showing weakness. This can be anywhere from a single person or the obstacles life throws at you. Vulnerability comes out when one or a whole nation is enduring a difficult time. Courage is the ability to be brave and overcome. Although one might not believe it, courage and vulnerability are closely related. In fact, vulnerability is the first step in finding courage. My research question is, does vulnerability lead one to be courageous, lead one to success? And I found that yes, vulnerability leads one to success because it allows them to be courageous, which is the first step in success. Yet, vulnerability is not always necessary. One would question, how does letting one's guard down and emotion show lead them to triumph? But in fact, it is key. It is key to be vulnerable in order to find courage. Brene Brown, who you probably know from her TED Talks on shame, courage, and vulnerability, has her PhD in social work, and during one of her most recent TED Talks said that vulnerability is our most accurate way to measure courage. People think of vulnerability as a weakness. Society punishes it when in fact it should be celebrated because it allows one to learn from their mistakes, be open to new ideas, and allow them to grow. During that same TED Talk, Brown states that vulnerability is not a weakness. It's the ability to show up and be seen. It's the ability to be brave when you cannot control the outcome. And that to me sounds like courage. When society deems vulnerability as a weakness and something that gets in the way of success, one has to know that it allows them to grow, which leads them to success. Muhammad Ali, who you probably know from his fame in the boxing ring, was also a humanitarian who advocated for the Vietnam War, what he deemed a genocide. He actually chose to put himself in a vulnerable position, allowing him to highlight his success. He used his boxing platform to advocate for the Vietnam injustices, and when a reporter asked him if he was going to go fight in Vietnam, he exclaimed, "My conscience won't let me go and shoot them." He further replied that the Vietnamese never called him slurs, never hurt him, and never used the dogs on him, alluding to the racial injustices going on at the US at the time. He had responded to the same question asked by a different reporter with saying, "How can I shoot these poor people? Just take me to jail." This was incredibly courageous. Sports idol risking his career for his beliefs. He put himself in a vulnerable position at a divided time. This took courage. He was convicted in the court case for avoiding the Army draft, sent to jail, and fined. He was also stripped of all titles and championships. He was also on a pause from boxing. He kept fighting, which took a lot of courage when he was told not to. He was eventually successful in his fight. Will Smith, the Bodine basketball player, not the comedian and actor, had many setbacks in his life, starting in his childhood by being the youngest of 10 children and raised by a single mother. He was very different than his Bodine peers. 10 years older because he served 7 years in the Army previously, raising a 2-year-old daughter as a single father, and coming from public school when most of his peers came from boarding school. He was in a vulnerable position and had to work hard and be courageous to pull himself out. He recalls rocking his daughter to bed in the middle of the night because she woke up from an asthma attack. He was reading his textbook and trying to catch some sleep himself. He pushed through the vulnerable times with courage and hard work, which led Dean Craig McEwen, a Bodine professor, to recognize Smith as Bodine's most remarkable student in memory. Vulnerability isn't always a one-person struggle. It can be as big as a whole nation. Franklin Delano Roosevelt defeated former President Hoover in the 1932 election. Hoover was massively unliked because of his lack of leadership during the early years of the Great Depression. FDR himself had a ton of pressure. During his inaugural address, he admits the vulnerability of the United States by saying, "Only a foolish optimist can deny the dark realities of the moment." And going back to Brene Brown, admitting one's vulnerability is the first step in finding courage. During this speech, he lays out the vision for the next 4 years, getting people back to work, becoming a united country, and having strict laws on banking, credit, and investments. He then exclaims his idea for the New Deal, which created jobs into the economy through domestic projects like infrastructure. The New Deal and World War II helped the U.S. pull out of the Great Depression. If it wasn't for the courage of Roosevelt, the U.S. would be in a much very different spot at the time. It was very courageous of Simone Biles to pull out of the 2021 Olympics to focus on getting help with her mental health after being sexually assaulted by one of the Team USA doctors. but looking strictly through a sports lens, this was not a win in the sports world. The world gave her a ton of hate and backlash as she responded, "The mental is just not here." Her actions brought her personal success in healing her mental health, which any humanitarian would applaud her for. But in the sports world, this was not necessarily a win. Michael Jordan did not use his platform for speaking out like Muhammad Ali did. He chose not to put himself in a vulnerable position, yet he was wildly successful. He had the opportunity to support Harvey Gantt, the Democratic candidate for the North Carolina Senate, versus the notoriously racist Republican Jesse Helms. He did not want to get politics into his business and his game because he didn't want to risk his fan base. He responded with, "Republicans buy sneakers too." In conclusion, looking through the many accounts of these people and this nation, you can see how vulnerability and courage are closely related, and how vulnerability is the first step in success. Thank you.
Thank you. How did your research question evolve as you moved through the process?
I originally was just focusing on the connection between vulnerability and courage, and then I kind of started writing my paper, and then kind of realizing all these people were successful in their fight with vulnerability. I kind of focused on how does vulnerability lead one to success.
Okay, thank you. What are the implications of your findings to our community?
I think right now pushing through hard times is very much the norm, and there's a lot of pressure on it, but I think sometimes stepping back and taking a break from the thing that's making you vulnerable, like Simone Biles did, is very much better for one's mental health than it is just pushing through, which can be more detrimental to their health. So I think that is kind of the biggest implication of having the pressure to push through, when sometimes that's not always the best option.
Okay, thank you.